Think about that one thing you usually look forward to. Maybe your first sip of coffee in the morning or, finally settling down with a good book.
Hmm.
Now imagine that thing suddenly losing its appeal. Or flip it. Remember pouring everything you had into a project and feeling that incredible, like, high of accomplishment when it was done?
Oh, definitely. That feeling is powerful.
And on the flip side, hasn't that urge for revenge, that burning desire to even the score ever popped into your head, even if you knew it wouldn't really solve anything?
Right. It's funny, isn't it, how our motivations and what we value, they don't always make perfect sense on paper.
Exactly.
It's precisely those moments, those seemingly illogical reactions, that offer a fascinating glimpse into the hidden workings of our minds.
Yeah.
We like to believe we're rational creatures, carefully weighing every option, but the truth, as we often experience firsthand, is far more nuanced and, well, dare I say, interesting.
And that's exactly what brings us to today's deep dive. You recommended we explore Dan Ariely's The Upside of Irrationality,
I did.
because you're looking for some practical understanding of why we do the things we do. You want to get under the hood of our quirks and see how that knowledge can actually lead to a better, more fulfilling life, right?
Absolutely. Ariely's work is brilliant because it uses these clever experiments and, real-world observations to reveal the often invisible forces that shape our decisions.
Mm-hmm.
He delves into everything from what truly motivates us at work to the surprising power of creation, the persistent pull of revenge, how we adapt
Right.
to new realities, and even the odd dynamics of helping others. It's quite a range.
So our goal today is to really dig into these studies and pull out the most useful insights for you, the listener. We want to equip you with a better understanding of those moments when you might scratch your head at your own behavior.
Yeah.
And more importantly, give you some tangible takeaways you can apply to your job, your relationships, your personal goals.
That's the plan. Make it actionable.
Okay, let's start with something that takes up a huge chunk of our lives. The world of work and what truly gets us going.
Indeed. When we think about work, we often focus on the tangible outcomes, the paycheck, the promotions.
Sure.
But there's a much deeper, often overlooked element at play, the meaning we derive from what we do.
Oh, okay.
As Ariely explores, there's a fundamental connection between our sense of identity and the labor we perform. Consider how often we define ourselves and others by our professions.
It's more than just a way to pay the bills, isn't it? It's tied to who we feel we are.
Exactly.
And this is perfectly illustrated by the Lego Bionicles experiment you mentioned. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, this was a really insightful study into how meaning affects our willingness to work. Participants were paid the same amount to build Lego Bionicles,
Okay.
but the conditions under which they built them varied significantly. In the meaningful condition, their creations were simply set aside after completion.
Right. Seen, acknowledged.
Then there was the Sisyphus condition, named after the mythological figure with his endless tasks,
Oh, boy.
where the Bionicles were immediately taken apart as they were being built, right in front of them.
Wow. That sounds incredibly demotivating. Like all your effort is instantly rendered pointless.
It really does. And there was a third condition, too, the ignored condition, where the finished models were just put in a box without the builder even seeing them again.
Oof. So what did they find? What was the difference?
Well, the results were quite striking. The participants in the meaningful condition built significantly more Bionicles than those in the Sisyphus condition,
Right.
even though their compensation was identical.
Makes sense.
And what's also telling is that the ignored group, they also showed lower motivation compared to those whose work was at least acknowledged by being set aside.
So even just being ignored hurts motivation, not just having it destroyed.
Precisely.
Right.
It suggests that even the slightest sense of purpose or recognition can make a big difference.
It really highlights that feeling of, does my work even matter? And Ariely captures this beautifully in the book, doesn't he?
He does. He states, the translation of joy into willingness to work seems to depend to a large degree on how much meaning we can attribute to our own labor.
So it's not just about the task, it's the meaning behind it.
Exactly. It's the sense of purpose and impact we connect to it.
So for our listener trying to boost their own motivation, maybe at work or on a personal project, what's the key takeaway here?
Well, I think it's about consciously trying to inject more meaning into your daily tasks, even the mundane ones.
How do you do that, though?
If you're a leader, think about how you can clearly connect your team's work to the bigger picture. Show them the impact. Offer specific acknowledgement for their contributions.
Yeah.
Even a simple thank you that explains why their work was valuable can go a long way. Don't just say good job, say good job because.
Right. Context matters. And if you're not a leader,
If you're an individual contributor, try to find ways to see the impact of your work no matter how small it seems. Can you connect it to a larger team goal? Can you see how it benefits a client or customer?
Mhm.
Finding that personal sense of meaning can be a powerful engine for motivation.
Absolutely. Feeling like you're contributing to something worthwhile rather than just, pushing papers or clicking buttons can be a game changer.
Totally.
Now, let's pivot to another fascinating aspect of how we value things. This idea that we tend to overvalue our own ideas and creations. The not invented here bias, right?
Yes, this is a really pervasive human tendency. We have this natural inclination to see our own thoughts and solutions as superior simply because, well, they originated with us.
Our babies are always the cutest.
Kind of. Ariely describes an experiment where participants were tasked with coming up with solutions to a particular problem.
Okay. And how do they rate their own solutions compared to, say, solutions presented by the researchers?
Across the board, the participants consistently rated their own solutions as much more practical, more effective, and more likely to succeed.
Even if they were identical.
Even when compared to identical solutions presented by the researchers as having come from someone else, this held true even when the, objective quality was the same.
Wow. It's like we have this internal spotlight that automatically makes our own brain children seem brighter and better.
Precisely. As Ariely puts it, once we feel that we have created something, we feel an increased sense of ownership, and we begin to overvalue the usefulness and the importance of our ideas.
That sounds like it could cause some problems, especially in teamwork.
It definitely can. It can lead to us overlooking potentially better solutions simply because they didn't come from us. We get attached.
So how can our listener become more aware of this bias in their own thinking? How do we fight it?
Well, the first step is simply recognizing that this bias exists and that we're all susceptible to it. Nobody's immune.
Okay, awareness first.
Then, when you're evaluating ideas, whether your own or someone else's, try to actively seek objective feedback. Ask trusted colleagues or mentors who aren't directly involved to give you their honest assessment.
Eat outside eyes.
Yes, and be genuinely open to the possibility that someone else's approach might be more effective, even if it challenges your own baby, so to speak.
Easier said than done sometimes.
True. And if you're presenting ideas, try to frame them in a way that encourages open discussion and invites constructive criticism. Acknowledge others' input. That can help create more level playing field for evaluating different perspectives.
That's a really valuable reminder to, check our egos and be open to better ideas,
Yeah.
regardless of their origin.
Mm.
Now, this tendency to overvalue what we create leads us quite naturally into another intriguing concept, the IKEA effect.
Exactly. The IKEA effect takes this idea of valuing our own contributions a step further. It suggests that we place a disproportionately high value on things that we have partially created ourselves,
Right.
even if the end result is maybe not perfect.
Like that bookshelf I painstakingly assembled, with a few extra screws left over and maybe a slightly wobbly shelf. I'm probably still prouder of it than if I had bought a perfectly built one from a high-end store.
That's the core of the IKEA effect. You put your effort in, you feel ownership. Ariely uses the fascinating example of instant cake mixes from the 1940s.
Oh yeah, what happened there?
Well, initially, these mixes, which only required adding water, weren't very popular. Housewives felt like they weren't actually baking. It was too easy, almost like cheating.
I remember reading about how they solved this, the add an egg strategy, was that it?
Precisely. By requiring consumers to add a fresh ingredient, like an egg or maybe oil and milk, it made the process feel more like genuine baking.
Just that little bit of extra effort.
Exactly. Even though the majority of the work was still done by the mix, this small element of personal contribution dramatically increased the perceived value and appeal of the product.
It's amazing how that little bit of effort can create such a strong sense of ownership and value. The book also mentions the car company, Local Motors, right?
Yeah, that's a fantastic modern example. They involve customers in the design and even the assembly process of their cars.
Really? You help build your own car?
To some extent, yes. By investing their own time and effort, customers develop a much stronger connection and, crucially, a higher valuation of the final product.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, of course, there's the memorable experiment with the folded paper frogs. Tell us about those.
Oh, yes. In this experiment, participants either folded paper frogs themselves, or origami frogs, or they were given pre-folded frogs made by experts.
Okay.
Now, even though the frogs folded by the participants were often quite clumsy and imperfect,
I can imagine mine.
the creators consistently valued their own creations significantly higher than the non-creators valued the flawlessly folded ones.
So my lopsided frog is worth more to me than a perfect one made by someone else.
To you, yes. The effort invested, no matter how small or how imperfect the outcome, led to this boost in perceived value.
So even a wonky paper frog becomes more precious simply because we put in the effort to make it? And Ariely has a really insightful statement about finding the right balance of effort here, doesn't he?
He does. He writes, ask people to expend too much effort, and you can drive them away. Ask them for too little effort, and you are not providing the opportunities for customization, personalization, and attachment.
So there's a sweet spot. Not too hard, not too easy.
Exactly. Where our effort leads to increased value without becoming, overwhelming or just frustrating.
So for our listener, how can they leverage this IKEA effect in their own life? What's the actionable insight?
Well, think about incorporating a degree of DIY into things you want to feel more connected to. This could be anything from cooking from scratch instead of just reheating, to assembling that furniture, or even contributing actively to the development of a project at work. Really getting your hands dirty, so to speak.
Right.
That feeling of having a hand in creating something can lead to greater satisfaction and a higher perceived value.
But there's a caveat.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
It's also crucial to be aware of the potential to overvalue your own partially completed projects.
Yeah.
Just because you put in the effort doesn't guarantee quality.
Right. My wobbly bookshelf might still be wobbly.
Exactly. So always seek objective feedback before you get too attached or assume it's the best thing ever just because you made it.
That's a really important balance to keep in mind, feeling invested without becoming blind to potential flaws. Now, building on this idea of effort and value, let's talk about the importance of actually finishing what we start.
This is a critical point that often gets overlooked, I think. Our exploration of creation and overvaluation naturally leads to the question of whether simply investing effort is enough, or if the act of completion itself plays a significant role in our attachment and valuation. Ariely touches on this with examples like repetitive tasks in occupational therapy.
Right, those tasks with a clear beginning and end, like assembling something simple, maybe sorting objects.
Exactly. And he conducted an experiment specifically on this where participants were asked to build Lego ducks.
More Lego. Okay,
In one condition, they built the duck from start to finish, completed it.
got it.
In the other, they started building, but before they could complete it, the duck was disassembled right in front of them, mid-build.
Oh, no. That sounds even worse than the Sisyphus condition almost. What was the outcome?
Participants were willing to pay significantly more for the completed Lego ducks compared to the ones that were taken apart mid-construction.
Even though they put in potentially the same amount of effort up to that point.
Possibly, yes. But this clearly demonstrates the psychological value we place on achieving a sense of completion. It's not just about the effort we put in, but the satisfaction of seeing a task through to the end.
So the act of finishing provides a sense of closure and accomplishment that directly increases the value we perceive in the outcome.
It seems so. That feeling of done matters.
How can our listener apply this to their own lives? Because we all have unfinished projects lying around.
Absolutely. The actionable insight here is to prioritize finishing tasks, even when they become challenging or, less appealing than when you started.
Push through the dip.
Kind of. And maybe break down large, overwhelming projects into smaller, more manageable steps with clear completion points.
Mini completions along the way.
Exactly. This not only makes the overall task less daunting, but also provides those valuable bursts of satisfaction as you complete each step. Check, check, check.
Right.
And be mindful of the tendency to start multiple projects and leave them unfinished. That can dilute your sense of accomplishment and decrease the overall value you see in your efforts.
Because you never get that payoff of completion.
Right. That feeling of done is a powerful motivator and value creator in itself.
Absolutely. That feeling of finally crossing something off your list can be surprisingly rewarding. Okay, let's shift gears now and delve into a slightly darker but equally fascinating side of our irrationality. The urge for revenge. We've all felt that sting of being wronged.
Indeed. The instinct for revenge is deeply ingrained in human nature, often overriding logic and long-term considerations. Ariely introduces this topic with an intriguing ancient desert scenario involving a donkey.
Oh, the one where the potential thief considers the owner's likely reaction, how irrational they might be.
Yes, exactly. The point is that if a potential thief believed you would act purely rationally, weighing the costs and benefits of pursuing them, they might be more inclined to steal your donkey. It might seem worth the risk.
Okay.
However, if they perceived you as someone driven by an irrational desire for revenge, someone willing to go to great lengths for retribution, even at significant personal
Like
costs.
chasing them across the desert for days, ignoring everything else.
Right. Then they would likely be deterred. The potential cost seems too high and unpredictable. In this peculiar case, the irrational urge serves as a deterrent.
So in that very specific, maybe slightly contrived scenario, the irrationality of revenge can actually have a positive outcome, a kind of strange upside.
It's a fascinating exception, isn't it? A theoretical upside.
Yeah.
However, as Ariely emphasizes, and this is crucial,
Yeah.
throughout history, oceans of blood have been spilled and an endless number of lives ruined in an effort to settle scores, even when nothing good could possibly come of it.
So mostly it's destructive.
Overwhelmingly so. It's a powerful but often destructive emotion. The book then touches on your own frustrating experience with your broken Audi,
Oh, don't remind me.
which I think resonates with many listeners who have felt that desire for a company to truly feel the impact of their poor service or bad product.
Absolutely. It wasn't just the inconvenience of the car trouble. It was the feeling of being dismissed and not valued as a customer that really fueled that urge for some kind of justice, however irrational it might have been in the grand scheme.
Right, that feeling of being wronged personally.
But the book also highlights a surprisingly effective antidote to this desire for revenge, a sincere apology.
This is a crucial counterpoint. Research has consistently shown the remarkable power of apologies in diffusing anger and resentment.
Really, it works.
It seems to. Ariely discusses a Harvard Business Review case involving a very upset customer named Tom Zaccarelli and Atita Motors, where an apology made a huge difference.
Okay,
And furthermore, studies on medical errors have found that when doctors offer a genuine apology,
which must be hard to do.
very hard, I imagine, but when they do, it leads to more favorable patient ratings and, importantly, a significantly reduced likelihood of lawsuits.
It's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? Admitting fault seems like it would increase liability, but saying sorry can actually prevent much bigger problems down the line.
It often can, and Ariely has a very direct statement about this.
What does he say?
He simply states, saying sorry often wins the day.
Huh. Just saying sorry.
Well, a sincere apology, coupled with taking responsibility for the mistake, can be incredibly effective in de-escalating conflict and rebuilding trust, both in personal and professional settings.
It sounds so simple, yet it can be so difficult to execute effectively, especially when emotions are high.
Absolutely. It requires humility and courage.
Now, the book also brings up an interesting distinction when it comes to directing our anger and seeking revenge. The difference between an agent and a principal. Can you explain that?
Sure. This relates to who we perceive as truly responsible for the perceived wrong. Ariely uses the example of a restaurant. If a waitress makes a mistake on our bill, she's the agent. Acting on behalf of the restaurant, we might be frustrated.
Oh, boy.
But we're likely less inclined to seek significant retribution compared to if we felt the restaurant owner, the principal, had intentionally overcharged us or created a policy designed to rip us off.
Ah, okay. We direct the real anger at the source, the one in charge.
Generally, yes. We tend to direct our anger and desire for revenge towards those we believe hold the ultimate responsibility and have the power to make things right, or who represent the source of the problem.
That makes perfect sense. We aim our frustration at who we see as being truly in charge. So what's the practical takeaway for our listener when it comes to revenge and apologies?
Well, first, recognize the powerful emotional pull of revenge, but always try to consider its potential long-term costs. Ask yourself, does the fleeting satisfaction of getting even truly outweigh the potential negative consequences? Usually not.
Pause before acting.
Definitely. And on the flip side, be mindful of the immense power of the sincere and timely apology when you or your organization makes a mistake. Taking responsibility and expressing remorse can often diffuse anger and prevent escalation far more effectively than defensiveness or avoidance.
So own your mistakes and apologize genuinely.
Yes. And also, when you feel wronged, Take a moment to consider who you believe is truly accountable. Is it the person in front of you, the agent, or the system, or person behind them, the principal? Your reaction might differ, and perhaps should differ, depending on that assessment.
Wise advice. Revenge often feels good in the short term, but rarely leads to a positive outcome, while a genuine apology can have surprisingly far-reaching positive effects. Okay, let's move on to another fascinating aspect of our psychology, how we adapt to changes in our lives, both good and bad.
Ah, yes. The remarkable phenomenon of hedonic adaptation. This is our inherent tendency to get used to new circumstances, whether positive or negative,
hmm
such that their initial emotional impact gradually fades over time. It's like our baseline resets.
Like getting used to a smell in a room.
Or, as Ariely illustrates, like our eyes adjusting to bright sunlight after being in a dark room. The initial glare subsides, and it soon feels normal.
Right, that initial shock or pleasure quickly fades, and this applies to much bigger life events as well, doesn't it? Like winning the lottery or, on the more difficult side, experiencing a significant setback like an accident.
Precisely. Studies have shown that while lottery winners often experience an initial surge of happiness,
Big surge, you'd think.
right, but their overall life satisfaction tends to return to their previous baseline levels over time. It becomes the new normal.
Wow.
And similarly, individuals who experience serious accidents while initially facing immense challenges often adapt remarkably well, and their reported happiness levels can recover significantly, sometimes returning close to their pre-accident levels.
That's kind of amazing, our resilience.
It is. As Ariely quotes, time heals all wounds precisely because, over time, you will partially adapt to the state of your world.
It's a powerful reminder that intense emotional states, whether high or low, are often temporary. So how can we use this understanding of adaptation in our decision-making?
Well, when you're making choices based on anticipated future happiness, like, oh, I buy this new car, I'll be happy forever, or trying to avoid potential unhappiness.
If this bad thing happens, my life is over.
Exactly. Factor in your remarkable capacity to adapt. We often overestimate how long the joy from a new purchase will last, or how long a negative event will continue to impact our well-being.
We think the feeling will last longer than it actually does.
Often, yes. Recognizing this can help us make more realistic decisions and avoid chasing fleeting highs or being paralyzed by the fear of temporary lows.
Interesting. So maybe we shouldn't base major life decisions solely on our current emotional forecasts of the future, because we'll probably adapt anyway.
That's a good way to put it. Now, Ariely also explores the idea of how we can actually disrupt this adaptation process, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not.
Okay, how does that work?
Yes, this is where some counterintuitive findings emerge. He discusses an experiment involving an unpleasant, high-pitched noise, much like a vacuum cleaner. Annoying sound.
Got it.
Participants who experienced the noise with short breaks in between actually rated it as more annoying overall than those who listened to it continuously for the same total duration.
That's surprising. You'd think the breaks would offer some relief, make it more tolerable.
That's what intuition might suggest. But it seems that the breaks prevented the participants from fully adapting to the unpleasant stimulus. Each time it restarted, it felt jarring and newly unpleasant. The adaptation process got reset.
Ah, okay, so the breaks made it worse because he couldn't get used to it.
Exactly. Conversely, for pleasurable experiences, like a relaxing massage chair,
Ooh, nice.
introducing breaks can actually enhance the enjoyment and even increase our willingness to pay more for it.
Really? How come?
It seems the anticipation of the return to pleasure after a short break amplifies the positive experience. You look forward to it coming back, you savor it more when it does.
So the takeaway seems to be, for unpleasant tasks, it's often best to power through without breaks, if possible, to allow adaptation to kick in.
Right. Let yourself get used to the drone of the vacuum cleaner, so to speak.
But for enjoyable experiences, strategically placed breaks might actually prolong the pleasure, make it feel more special.
That's a key practical insight. When you have a task you dread, like cleaning the garage or doing your taxes,
Right.
try to focus and complete it in one go if feasible. Minimize interruptions. But when you're engaging in something you enjoy, like a vacation, a delicious meal, or a hobby, consider breaking it up into segments. Take pauses to savor the experience and prevent the feeling of it becoming routine or taken for granted. Reset the pleasure meter.
That's really useful to know. Spread out the good stuff, consolidate the bad stuff.
Kind of, yes. Now, the book also touches on the fact that adaptation isn't always complete or uniform. It's complex. Ariely uses his own experience of not fully adapting to his altered physical appearance after his severe burns.
Right, some things are harder to adapt to than others.
This is a crucial point. While we are remarkably adaptable, some things, particularly those that are constantly salient or maybe unpredictable or tied to our core identity, can be more resistant to full adaptation.
Okay.
He also uses the example of buying a new, luxurious couch versus spending money on more intermittent pleasures like going out to dinner or taking short trips.
And the couch, you adapt to quickly, but the experiences retain their pleasure longer. Is that the idea?
That's the general idea. The couch becomes part of the background relatively quickly. You adapt. The intermittent pleasures, because they're spaced out, you don't adapt to as fully. And the key insight there was, as you said, to slow down pleasure.
Right. I remember that phrase. Slow down pleasure.
Precisely. Ariely advises the lesson here is to slow down pleasure. Avoid accumulating too many new sources of pleasure all at once, like buying a new car, a new TV, and booking a fancy vacation all in the same month.
Because you'll just adapt to all of them faster and the combined impact will be less.
Exactly. You'll adapt to them more quickly, and their individual impacts will diminish faster. Instead, space out your indulgences to maintain their novelty and positive effect. Savor them one by one.
Okay, that makes sense. And conversely, what about negative changes?
Conversely, when facing necessary cutbacks or unavoidable, unpleasant changes, it might actually be more effective psychologically to implement several changes at once.
Rip the Band-Aid off.
Sort of, to facilitate a faster adaptation to the new, perhaps less desirable, normal, get used to the whole new situation quicker.
So it's about being mindful of the pace and timing of both positive and negative changes to manage our natural tendency to adapt.
It really is strategic pacing.
Okay, let's move on to another area where our behavior can be surprisingly irrational. Our motivations when it comes to helping others. Charity, altruism.
Yes, this section of the book explores the often complex and sometimes illogical ways in which we decide to extend help to those in need. It's not always straightforward. Ariely delves into the identifiable victim effect, which is a powerful psychological phenomenon.
Right. Remind us what the core of that effect is again.
It's the compelling finding that we are far more likely to feel empathy and offer assistance, money, time, whatever, to a specific identifiable individual who is suffering.
Like seeing a picture of one child in need.
Exactly. Than we are to help a large group of anonymous people facing the same or even greater hardship, often represented just by statistics. The book uses a vivid scenario of a single drowning girl to illustrate this. You'd likely jump in to save her, but might hesitate to donate to prevent future drownings statistically.
It's that feeling of a real, tangible person with a name and a story that pulls at our heartstrings much more than abstract numbers.
It absolutely does, and Ariely has a key quote about this.
What's that?
He states, "The more personal, visible, and present a particular victim is, the more likely we are to feel empathy for them and the more willing we are to open our hearts and wallets. Visibility and personality matter."
So for our listener who might be involved in charitable work or fundraising or simply wants to be more effective in helping, what's the actionable insight here?
Well, when trying to motivate yourself or others to support a cause, focus on highlighting individual stories and the personal impact of the need. Show the faces, tell the stories.
Make it human.
Exactly. Rather than just presenting large, impersonal statistics. While data is important for understanding the scale of a problem, it's the human element that often drives that crucial emotional connection and motivates action.
But there's a danger there too, right? Focusing only on the one story.
Yes, that's the important caveat. It's also important to be aware that our empathy can be disproportionately swayed by these identifiable victims. We might pour resources into helping one person while neglecting a larger, less visible group with greater need. So we should strive to balance that emotional response with a broader, more rational understanding of the overall situation.
That's a really good reminder. Balance our emotional responses with a broader understanding. Now, the book also touches on the drop in the bucket effect. What's that?
This is another significant factor that can, unfortunately, suppress our willingness to help. It describes the feeling of discouragement we experience when faced with an overwhelmingly large problem, like global poverty or climate change.
Right.
It leads us to believe that our individual contribution or small donation, our single action will be insignificant, just a drop in the bucket, and therefore maybe not worth making.
It's that sense of, What difference can I possibly make? The problem is just too huge.
Exactly. And this feeling of insignificance can unfortunately lead to widespread inaction, even in situations where the collective impact of many small contributions could be absolutely substantial.
So how can we overcome this sense of futility? How do we fight the drop in the bucket feeling?
The key, Ariely suggests, is to shift your focus. Move away from the enormity of the overall problem and focus instead on the tangible impact you can make with your individual action.
Focus small.
Focus on the specific difference you can achieve. Reframe large issues into smaller, more manageable steps where your contribution feels meaningful and visible. Think about the one person you can help, the specific outcome your donation can achieve.
So don't get paralyzed by the scale.
Exactly. Don't let the scale paralyze you. Every drop does contribute to filling the bucket, even if you can't see the water level rise immediately. By focusing on the positive difference you can make on an individual level or a specific measurable outcome, you can overcome that paralysis of feeling insignificant.
That's a really empowering perspective. It's about focusing on what's within our control and the positive impact we can have, however small it might seem in the grand scheme of things.
Precisely. Make the impact feel real to you.
Now, let's explore one last major area from the book, how our emotions, even seemingly unrelated ones, can significantly influence our decisions in surprising ways.
Yes, this brings us to the fascinating realm of incidental emotions. These are emotions that are triggered by one situation, but then carry over and influence our behavior in a completely unrelated situation later on.
Okay, give me an example.
Ariely provides a relatable scenario. Someone has a really frustrating commute, gets cut off in traffic, arrives at work angry,
When there?
and then walks into a staff meeting. That lingering anger from the commute, even though it has nothing to do with the meeting's topic or the people in the room, can color their interactions, make them more critical, less cooperative, influence their decisions during that meeting.
Right. We've all probably done that. Let a grumpy morning affect the rest of our day without even realizing it's happening.
Exactly. And the book also discusses the ultimatum game experiment, which we touched on briefly, but with an emotional twist involving movie clips.
Okay, how did that work?
Yes, in this clever variation, participants watched either an upsetting movie clip, something designed to induce anger or frustration, or a neutral one before playing the ultimatum game.
Where one person offers a split of money and the other accepts or rejects for both.
That's the one. The surprising finding was that participants who had watched the upsetting movie clip beforehand were significantly more likely to reject unfair offers,
Even if rejecting meant they got nothing.
even if it meant they got no money at all. Their prior, unrelated anger from the movie clip influenced their economic decision-making, making them more sensitive to perceived unfairness and more willing to punish it, even at a cost to themselves.
Wow. So their emotional state from something completely separate carried over and affected their choices in a totally different context.
Absolutely. And Ariely has a key statement highlighting the spillover effect.
What does he say?
He states, emotions can influence decisions even when they are not directly related to the choice at hand, and even after the emotional experience has passed.
Even after the emotion has passed. That's interesting.
Yes, the study indicated that the lingering effects of the emotional prime continued to influence decisions even after the participants consciously reported that their anger or upset feelings had subsided. It leaves a residue, apparently.
It's like our past emotions leave a subtle imprint on our decision-making processes, even when we think we're back to neutral. And this connects to the idea of self-hurting, doesn't it? That sounds related.
Exactly. It flows right into it. Self-hurting is our tendency to look at our own past behavior as a guide for future behavior. We repeat past decisions or actions, often assuming we must have had a good reason for them the first time,
Right.
even if the original reasons, like those incidental emotions we just talked about, are no longer relevant or were never rational to begin with.
We follow our own tracks, basically.
Kind of, yes. Ariely describes a modified ultimatum game experiment where participants who had previously been receivers and had rejected an unfair offer, likely feeling angry, then acted as senders in a later round. Their past experience of feeling angry and rejecting an offer influenced the offers they made to new receivers. They tended to make less generous offers themselves.
So they were essentially mimicking their own past emotional reaction or the behavior that resulted from it, even when the circumstances had changed, and they were now in the position of power.
It appears so. They used their past emotionally driven action as a signal for how to act in the future, even in a different role.
That's a bit scary, how we can lock ourselves into patterns based on past feelings. What's the key takeaway for our listener regarding incidental emotions and self-hurting? How do we guard against this?
Well, the crucial insight is to become more aware, there's that word again, awareness of your current emotional state before making important decisions.
Check in with yourself.
Exactly. Take a moment to recognize if any unrelated feelings, frustration from traffic, annoyance from an email, even excitement from something else might be influencing your judgment right now.
And if they are.
If you're feeling particularly emotional, whether positive or negative, it might be wise to delay the decision, if possible, until you've had some time to process those feelings and return to a more neutral state. Don't decide angry or even overly elated.
Okay. What about the self-hurting part?
Reflect on your past decisions, especially recurring ones. Ask yourself why you made that choice the first time. Was it based on rational analysis, or was it perhaps driven by fleeting emotions that are no longer relevant?
Question your own patterns.
Yes. Be careful not to blindly follow your own past behavior without reevaluating the current situation. Ensure your choices are based on present circumstances and logic, rather than just echoes of past feelings or habits.
That's really insightful, bringing a conscious awareness to the emotional undercurrents that might be steering our decisions and questioning if our past actions are still the right guide.
It takes effort, but it can lead to much better decisions.
Well, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, diving deep into these fascinating and often surprising aspects of our irrationality, all thanks to your recommendation of Dan Ariely's book.
We have indeed. And I think the fundamental takeaway from all of this exploration is that while we often strive for perfect rationality, like some sort of economic ideal,
Right.
our behavior is often and predictably irrational. But that's not necessarily all bad. Understanding these patterns, these quirks of human nature, provides us with invaluable insights into why we do what we do.
And knowing is half the battle.
Well, it empowers us, ultimately, to make more informed and potentially more fulfilling choices in our lives. We can work with our nature rather than just being baffled by it.
So just to quickly recap some of those key actionable insights for you, our listener. Remember the power of finding meaning in your work. Connect to the purpose. And acknowledge the contributions of yourself and others.
Mm-hmm. That meaning matters.
Be vigilant about the not invented here bias.
Mm-hmm.
Your idea isn't automatically the best. Actively seek objective feedback.
Check your ego.
Leverage the IKEA effect. Putting in effort builds connection and value, but don't let that effort cloud your judgment of the actual quality.
Right. Be proud, but realistic.
Recognize the deep satisfaction and perceived value that comes from actually completing tasks. Finish things.
That sense of done is cute.
Be aware of the destructive potential of revenge. And, conversely, the surprisingly effective power of sincere apologies.
Apologize well. Avoid revenge spirals.
Understand that adaptation is a constant force. We get used to things, good and bad. So manage your exposure to both pleasures and pains, strategically slow down pleasure, consolidate pain.
Pace yourself.
Be mindful of the identifiable victim effect, the power of one story, and the drop-in-the-bucket effect, feeling your contribution is too small when considering how to help others. Focus on tangible impact.
Make charity personal, but also rational.
And finally, remember that incidental emotions from unrelated events and the tendency to self-hurt based on past behavior can lead to less than optimal decisions. Take time to reflect before you act. Check your emotional state.
Pause and reflect. Precisely. By gaining a deeper understanding of these inherent predictable irrationalities, we can begin to design our lives, our work environments, and our relationships in ways that better align with our true motivations and, hopefully, lead to greater satisfaction and success.
Absolutely. And on that note, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to ponder. Now that you have a deeper understanding of some of these predictable irrationalities that shape our behavior, what is one specific area of your life where you can apply these insights today or this week?
Make it practical.
Yeah. Think about making a more conscious and potentially more fulfilling decision. Maybe it's an ongoing project at work. Maybe it's a dynamic in one of your relationships, or even a significant purchase you've been considering.
Where is irrationality tripping you up, or where could you leverage it?
Right. We encourage you to take a moment to think about how your inherent irrationality might be influencing your choices in that specific area, and whether aligning with some of these insights about meaning, creation, adaptation, emotion could lead to a better outcome for you. Is your irrationality serving you well there, or could you make a tweak?
Food for thought.